Hey there, you're listening to the Girls Talking Life podcast, and I'm your host, Johanna. If you're like me, you love time with friends. I always leave feeling encouraged, inspired to try something different, or I've learned something new. So why not continue to grow even when we can't be with our girlfriends? We're not made to do life on our own. So in each episode of this show, I'll bring you a girl and her story to give you refreshing ideas to stir your soul. Let's walk this road together. Are you ready to talk life? Welcome to another Girls Talking Life Extra. It's not a full show, just a short chat with a past guest to let you know what she's up to now. I am talking with Jem Fadling. Jem joined me on episode 43, and we talked about what your soul loves. Questions to ask that reveal God's work in you. If you haven't heard that conversation, be sure to go back and listen. Jem is the founding partner of Unhurried Living, a nonprofit that trains people to rest deeper, live fuller, and lead better. She's a certified life coach and a trained spiritual director who coaches women at the intersection of spiritual leadership and soul care. Today we're talking about her new book, Hold That Thought, Sorting Through the Voices in Our Heads. It releases next week on September 20th. Here is my conversation with Jem. Hello, Jem. Thank you so much for coming back. I am just delighted to see your face.
Well, thank you so much, Johanna. I love being with you. You are a delightful conversationalist.
We talked, I think it was around 2 years ago. You were on episode 43, and you were talking about your soul. What does your soul love? What are some ways that we can slow down and unhurry our soul? It was a spectacular conversation, but you are here today to talk about your next project, which is about our minds and our thoughts. So what have you been working on?
Yeah, well, I guess this was the next part of my journey. I took a deep dive into kind of what goes on up here in our thought life. And, there's scriptures, of course, take every thought captive, or be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And that's the one that really captured my attention. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So in a way, I'm not here to talk about how we're going to tackle all the thoughts in our heads, but how is this a part of our transforming journey? It's just one aspect that we can address. And so what goes on in our brains? A lot goes on every single day, right? Thoughts. I'm sure you can resonate with that, unwilled thoughts, unwelcome thoughts, or hopeful and loving thoughts, just thoughts. But what might we do with them? So I'm exploring that.
Are you also talking about quieting our thoughts? They can be a little out of control at times.
They can. Yeah. So the book is called Hold That Thought, and the subtitle is Sorting Through the Voices in Our Heads. And so in the book, I talk about thoughts and voices kind of synonymously.
Okay.
And I've even named some of the voices, and that's a bulk of the book is talking about certain kinds of voices that come in and prove to be unhelpful, like the inner critic,
right,
or the stressed achiever, or whatever. So sort of taking one step back from what's going on inside, the spinning, take one step back and let's look at them. And not judge or critique or shame or push away necessarily, but how can we actually, in the words of the terms of internal family systems, of course, they would call these parts. Can we look at our parts objectively with the Holy Spirit and then discern decisions about if we want to keep entertaining them, and especially then how we want to behave?
Right.
Okay.
I heard a sermon recently, and the pastor was saying, what we hear most about ourselves is what we tend to believe about ourselves. And I feel like definitely there are outside voices coming into that, but a lot of it is that internal voice, and that leads to how we feel and what we think about ourselves.
Yeah, our brain likes to attach to things, and our brains do have a negativity bias. So even if we heard a phrase once early in life or wherever we heard it in life, our brain might want to take that and spin out on it a bit. And that's why this practice there's a practice that I introduce inside the book called Notice, Discern, and Respond. And I just call it NDR. But that practice is helpful for that because, yes, we do tend to be our worst critic, and we tend to be our own brake pedal.
Yes.
And at times our own enemy, right? Because of what we're allowing to spin. For some people, it's brand new information that you are not your thoughts. I mean, that's a classic wisdom from classic spirituality. You aren't your thoughts. You have thoughts. And so by extension, then you're more than your thoughts. So even being armed with that much information, you could begin to believe that you could, I can't think of another word besides manage. I don't really like the word manage, but for now, let's use it. Managing the thoughts, not just allowing them to have the microphone and do whatever they're going to do willy-nilly.
So say that I have noticed a thought that I don't care for. I don't want it to continue spinning in my head. What is something that I can do to take that thought captive?
Yeah. So if you move through the process, of course, you've already mentioned notice is the first step. And I think that's a big one for a lot of people because we're not always actually watching. It's sometimes because we're running at a certain pace or living at a certain pace, it's kind of all happening. So once you've paused and noticed, the next step is really to discern. So what's discernment? Well, get curious, right? Ask a few questions. Where did this thought come from? Is this thought true? Is it helping me right now? There are so many questions you can ask. And of course, in the book, I offer a bunch of different ways to come at it in that way. But those are good ones to start with. You've noticed it. Let's discern it. Is it true? Is it helping me? Is it blocking me in any way? And start wondering, right? And even in that, you can make the turn within the discernment. Well, what might I want to do instead? Right? And once you've started to turn that corner, now you're moving into the R, which is respond. What might I choose? What's more helpful? And I don't like to categorize good and bad, like this is a good thought and that's a bad thought, because that's so subjective. And how do we even know? You know what I mean? I like to use helpful and unhelpful. So in the discernment, if you're taking the unhelpful thought and you're wondering and getting curious and asking questions, then when you move to respond, you can ask yourself, what might be more helpful for me right now? And you can play around with that. Get a reframe. Find another more true, more spirit-filled sentence to say. I like to say them out loud because then my brain hears my own voice say it. You know what you said earlier about, what we repeat things inside of ourselves. So say it out loud, say the good, true thing that you want to aim at and see how that feels. It's a start.
I like that. So with all these thoughts swirling in our minds, how do we discern? And maybe you go into this and maybe you don't. How do we know what thoughts are, like you said, spirit-filled and what thoughts are just our own human thought, reaction, interpretation?
I think a lot of times you can tell something by its fruit, right? So on just stark analysis doesn't always work. I mean, you can make some headway that way, but then you can kind of get spinning again in a whole different cycle. But what's the fruit of this thought? If the fruit of the thought is that you are stuck, overwhelmed, stressed, discouraged, shamed, that's not from the spirit. I mean, I'm not saying that there isn't ever a way in which God will try to move us in a direction, but I really don't think the spirit tries to press us down to get us to change, right? The spirit is invitational and wooing and drawing us toward love, right? So if that's what's happening, that's probably not your best move. But if the fruit of the thought, of course, now we're at the fruit of the spirit, right? If the fruit of the thought is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, any of those, then for sure it's from the spirit because that is listed as the fruit of the spirit. So I know in this very brief conversation, I have to say this. I absolutely do not want to make this sound simplistic. I don't think you can just have an unhelpful thought and then just make the new thought and now you're all better. I am not saying that in the book. Everything we're talking about here briefly is really a part of a process.
You are a founder of Unhurried Living, and I would imagine that this book falls right in line with what you teach there about slowing down and asking questions and sitting in the questions.
Yeah, I love questions. I am a spiritual director. I'm a soul care coach. And so I'm all about the invitational and powerful question. Because what that does is it allows the person then to go inward and process.
Yeah.
We make a lot of statements, which is good and true. We need to teach and train. But when you're in transformation, the goal, and when you're coming alongside someone, you want to come alongside and ask good questions that help them process. So of course, the book is laced with questions. It's laced with formational invitations. There are questions at the end of every chapter that hopefully take you further within as you journal with God and seek to, as we said at the beginning, Romans 12, be transformed, right? It's a passive idea, be transformed. We are being transformed. Mm. So there's a cooperation.
Right. We do not do the transforming.
Yes.
I think this sounds amazing. I think it is coming at a fantastic time when our society and our culture, I feel like thoughts have spun out of control.
Yes. Oh. And I mean, if you're on the internet at all in any form, it's very, very contemptuous.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of thoughts, but you can tell there's not a lot of discernment or wisdom applied many times before people are speaking.
Right.
And so I think that's my grand invitation to us is let's pause for just a minute and look what's happening up here. What's happening before it comes out my mouth. It's, I think, a worthy practice to try this out, right? Yeah.
For our benefits and everyone that we're interacting with, right?
Yes.
Jim, when can we get our hands on this book? And where can we find it?
Yeah, so it releases on September 20. So depending on when this airs, you can either pre-order it by going to unhurriedliving.com or you can order it. Okay. Either way, if you can't figure all that out, go to Amazon and see what form the book is in and either pre-order or order now. I am so excited. And in many ways, I'm actually aiming this book at women. A man could read it and they wouldn't feel like I was talking to women only. But my heart is for the soul of women. And so I'm hoping many will feel encouraged.
How about, is this an individual thing or is this something that people could do as a group?
Well, definitely it's group. I have a group guide in the back.
Okay.
And as I said, every chapter has questions at the end. So there's definitely a way for it to become something that you circle around to have a wonderful conversation. And I'll mention this as well. Starting on September 12, I'm relaunching my, it's called Replenish. And it's online coaching and community for women. And one of the first things I'm going to do is go through the book live on a Zoom with the women who are part of that community. So again, unhurriedliving.com, you can find out about everything.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Jim, for telling us what you're up to now. It has been a pleasure to talk with you and see you again. And I hope this book gets into the hands of the women who need to read it, myself included.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Johanna. It's wonderful to see you again.
Thank you, Jim. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Jem. I loved getting to talk with her again. She is such a steady, calming soul guide. You can find her newest book and the details for her membership community, Replenish, at unhurriedliving.com. I'll be back next week with an all-new episode. Thanks for tuning in, friend.